We've come to the second panel on changing lives and changing worlds. And I would like to introduce the chairperson for this panel and let him do the job of introducing the panel and the three wonderful speakers. The chairperson for this panel is Mr. Alan John. He is my other boss, the director of the Asia Journalism Fellowship. He spent 35 years at the Straits Times as a writer, editor, trainer, and mentor. So if you look at the biographical notes, you will see the titles of two of the books that he has written, and the titles of the books are as sensational as he is. So Alan, welcome. Yes. So Cheryl, Dewi, and Prem, please join Alan on stage. Thank you.
Rishad and Yondan, stop talking. Sit down. All right, these guys. Anyway, hello everyone. I'm very excited to be here, so I'm not going to go to that podium and say anything to you because I'm ready to listen to the speakers already, okay? And we have three wonderful speakers here today. We've got Cheryl from the Philippines, Devi from Indonesia, and Premesh from Malaysia. I'm not even going to introduce them to you because you have to open this piece of paper and read about them, okay? It's all there. But it's why is it wonderful, okay? And Cheryl is going to go first. But, you know, at the AJF, we have fellows that come to Singapore from different countries every year. And I never get tired of asking the fellow from the Philippines to tell us the story of the Ampatuan massacre that happened in the Philippines. You call it something else, the Maguindanao. Yes, it happened there. And it's a terrific tragedy. It's a horrific story. And after you hear it, you wonder why anyone would be a journalist in the Philippines, okay? And Cheryl will tell you about some exciting things that are going on and why journalists are not just coming to journalism still, but doing new and interesting things. Devi over here, like me, Devi is here to prove to you that there is life after the Straits Times. And for many years, we worked together at the Straits Times before she went on to the Jakarta Post. And or the other way around, okay, Jakarta Post and then Straits Times. But Indonesia, you know, Indonesia is our big neighbor, a massive number of Muslims in Indonesia. We hear about, you know, pulls towards the conservative right all the time. And Devi is doing the most exciting work with her magazine, Magdalene, you know. And she's come to Singapore at a time where we are all in the throes of debating this whole question about whether homosexual sex should be a crime or not a crime. And it's a sensitive issue and the two sides never meet. But over in Indonesia, Devi is writing these stories about persecution and prosecution of people in the LGBT community and others. You know, so I'm excited to hear this. 2018 has been a momentous year for our other neighbor, Malaysia. You know, and so who could have thought in January of 2018 that in May of 2018 there would be a new government in Malaysia? Who would have thought that, you know, 92 is the new 50? You know, how wonderful is that? Suddenly you have a prime minister who's 92 years old and all of us feel young again. Oh, wonderful. But if it was a momentous year for Malaysia, it was even more momentous for Malaysia Kini, and Premesh was over there, who set up this news portal in nearly 20 years ago, 20 years next year, ahead of its time, doing stuff that the rest of us didn't get round to for another 10 or 15 years, you know, going online first, coming up with videos when the rest of us weren't watching them yet, and then fighting against, you know, continuous harassment and the worst kind of political pressure, having, you know, the police raid the newsroom and take away computers and stuff like that. and landing themselves with lawsuit after lawsuit. And Prem would not have been here today if he didn't have a date in court yesterday where one of the cases against him and his editor-in-chief, Stephen Gunn, was dropped. So we are really happy that you are here today. Okay, thank you. So enough for me. We're going to start with Cheryl over here. Cheryl, just tell us that story from the Philippines, and then we will move right along. And everybody else, please start writing down your questions now. You know, because I'm calling out names afterwards. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Alan. Good day. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks very much to the AJF and Carol Soon specifically for giving me the opportunity to join in the conversations today. So I'll be sharing my observations on the emergence of transmedia solidarities between journalists, artists, and academics in this precarious time in the Philippines. But first, allow me to give a little bit of context. Journalists have taken a valuable role in reporting issues of marginalized communities that require them to openly probe and criticize state and non-state agents. We often know of events from the first encounter of stories by journalists. One, in the contemporary Philippines, there is the war on drugs campaign of the state, which the president himself proudly stated to continue to be relentless. It has been reported that some 4,229 suspects were killed by police in the context of acknowledged operations, and another 22,000 plus deaths under investigation that may be linked to drugs. It is through the tireless work of journalists that these deaths are reported, although relatively obtaining much less coverage now. There is also the martial law in Mindanao, which continues until the end of the year. UN special rapporteurs released a statement saying that the indigenous communities of Mindanao are suffering from the island's ongoing militarization. Thousands of indigenous peoples have already been forcibly displaced by the conflict and have seen their houses and livelihoods destroyed. And of course, there are ongoing issues of land grabbing in indigenous ancestral lands that alternative media such as Kilab Multimedia and Alter Media actively and continually report on. But reporting the most pressing issues can pose real risks for journalists in the Philippines. Said to be one of the countries in our region enjoying press freedom, this problematic notion is quickly contradicted by the fact that we are ranked as among the most dangerous countries for journalists. To be exact, the IFJ reported in January 2018 that the Philippines is the most dangerous country in Southeast Asia for journalists. Globally, we came in 6th on the list. The IFJ also reported that 146 Filipino journalists had been murdered since 1990, the second highest number in the world, next only to Iraq. The Ampatuan massacre that Alan was just mentioning had 34 local journalists killed. They were covering the convoy of a political candidate and were shot dead. That was in November 2009, their bodies buried in the mountain using government backhoes. This is considered the deadliest single attack on journalists anywhere in the world and happened not in the context of war or armed conflict, unfortunately, during supposedly peacetime. So far, unfortunately, none of the alleged masterminds, members of a powerful political clan apparently, have been convicted. During the dark days of the martial law period, the media have also been repressed and suppressed, and mass arrests of journalists took place. Return to the present time, the media in the Philippines continues to come under attack both online and offline, raising serious concerns about the safety and security of the country's media workers. Journalists are accused of bias and sensationalism, for example, not reporting the truth, and worse, receive death threats for themselves and their families. Just a few days ago, Inquirer Media Bureau reporter Julia Lipala became the subject of hate posts and death threats on social media after the publication of her story about the gruesome death of 7 indigenous men from the hands of the military. Accusations of her being a certified paid columnist spread like wildfire on social media, and among the comments are threats to Alipala's life. These risks faced by journalists are also set in the landscape of some public distrust towards the media in recent years. It is in this context of threats against journalists, alongside the struggles of marginalized communities that continually need to be reported, that has set the landscape, it seems to me, for both organized and serendipitous partnerships between journalists, artists, and academics that help in circulating stories for public attention and engagement, and which I call transmedia solidarities. This cooperative practice, where artists and academics draw from reports of journalists, recast and translate these into stories and creative works accessible to multiple publics, may help temper the risks for journalists, while at the same time re-emphasize the value of their reports. Transmedia storytelling pertains to the process of telling a story across various media, where integral elements of a story are dispersed systematically through multiple channels, and each medium makes unique contribution to create a unified, coordinated experience. This concept has often been used in the context of entertainment, where a franchise like Star Wars can be consumed in film, game, comic, books, or apps, with each rendering contributions to the power of storytelling. I borrow the idea to think about the emerging solidarities that I will share today. Example 1. A first example is media reporting on the deaths related to the state's campaign against illegal drugs. Since the launch of the campaign, reporters and photojournalists courageously covered the deaths. In the reports, the dead's face were often wrapped in masking tape, as if, to quote a historian and analyst, to dehumanize them. But one death in particular caught people's attention. 17-year-old Kian de los Santos was killed by policemen, one of the casualties of the war on drugs. Report after report, journalists were trying to probe how exactly Kian was killed. What became crucial was a CCTV footage in the bottom, capturing the events of the night that Kian died, and which at many points contradicted earlier reports from the police accounts of what happened. Along with the CCTV footage, writers of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism interviewed Kian's family, and under its PCIJ Story project, collaborated with a children's book author, Wen Cahiles, and an illustrator. The book used media reports on the death, but also additional interviews with his family to craft the book's narrative. It showed not just Kian's death, but attempted to humanize it, to show that what his dreams were as a child, how he was a son, how he was a classmate, friend, or student. It was in this collaboration process that we get multiple facets of the realities about the impact of this policy to a human being and to his family. The book was launched in social media, and printed copies are now being distributed for free to teachers, schools, and community outreach programs for educational purposes. It won a National Book Award and is a case of planned collaboration between journalists and artists. My second example is RD3RD, an adaptation of Shakespeare's play, Richard III, but set in the contemporary context of the current leadership. The play added new scenes and dialogue to create a whirlwind of images that connects Richard III and his murderous rise to power with present-day Philippines. The play used actual video footages from media reports on the deaths resulting from the war on drugs. The reports served as backdrop of the story, that which contemporizes the play. The play makes a frightening wake-up call on why the people allow tyrants to rise. The audience would be struck at the end of the play to realize, I was struck myself, to realize that my seat carried the name of the dead reported by the media. Directed by artists Anton Juan and Ricardo Abad in collaboration with a professor of English and Drama Studies, and borrowing from media footages, this is an example of an indirect collaboration, a case of cross-referencing and reappropriation of the work of reporters and rendering them in another powerful form, the theater. Another example is this work, a content analysis of over 5,000 news reports on the deaths related to the same campaign. I am personally involved in this study. So a collaboration of 3 universities in the country, the project analyzed the contents of news reports on the same issue with the intention of obtaining patterns to better understand the circumstances of the deaths. When these patterns surfaced, a website was created to visualize the patterns and map out the deaths across the country with the help of the Columbia Center of the Stabil Center. In turn, when the Drug Archive, the Drug Archive is the website which now helped visualize the aggregated data that we managed to obtain from analyzing the news reports. After which, artists look at the visual patterns and alongside the works of photojournalists, converted the data into a multimedia exhibit that highlights the impact of this anti-illegal drugs campaign. Originating from individual reports by journalists, this collaborative effort has tried to make sense of patterns of reports and retell the story of the impact of the campaign using the aggregate. The multiplicity of forms, academic reports, graphs, maps, and then later on multimedia installations, photo essays, and films render the reports for the consumption of different kinds of audiences. Similar efforts of multimedia exhibits are staged in universities. Exactly today, and right at this very moment, a photo exhibit with multiple performances and screenings of related films is open in my university. It utilizes the brave work of photojournalists and combines them with further research by academics on the victims' families and retelling of their stories by poets, alongside the live performances of a student street dance group, as Shri says in the morning, to mainstream the issue and attract millennials. The intention here is to bring the reports in another form closer to students, faculty, and the academic community. Just to talk about the same initiative in the context of alternative media, the second case concerns the issues of indigenous communities that have been actively covered by alternative and indigenous media over the years. These involve killings of IP communities, aggressions caused by large-scale mining, sudden enforced disappearances, and encroachment of their ancestral lands. Inspired by actual events reported by the media, a film, Tupug Imatuy, tackles the indigenous community of the Manobos' struggles against environmental plunder and the militarization of their families. The movie, inspired by a survival account of an elderly lumad in Talaingod, captured by soldiers, based on media reports, has won awards as one of the best films in 2017, a milestone for this Davao-made film on indigenous people. Co-produced by Kilab Multimedia, an alternative media outfit in the country, the film was shown initially only in Mindanao, at the South Island of the Philippines, but then taken up by a national film festival and shown in theaters across the country. This helped the story to be retold to a much broader audience, aided with the compelling visual and audio components. And now I wrap up. In summary, these collaborations form as a result of collective concern of multiple sectors to tell the story of underprivileged communities. The stories originate from media reports and then probed further, cross-analyzed, or rendered in new forms through planned or serendipitous collaborations among journalists, artists, and academic institutions. Last week, I was in a conference where a speaker lamented the civil society, and that includes the media, in the Philippines is dying, with the major civil society organizations being run by senior citizens, I quote. I disagree. I think it has just taken new forms. In this time of risk for journalists in the country, it has proven crucial for multiple, even non-media actors to take these reports and render them in multiple forms. The creation of these transmedia narratives not only facilitates appreciation of the story through powerful storytelling, it facilitates the reach of broader, perhaps more diverse audiences. At the same time, it may help temper the risk for journalists as it diffuses the accountability towards the story. Now, the story is not just told by a reporter. The story is told and retold by a community of storytellers. In writing this presentation, I realized, however, that these collaborations could in fact extend to also retell and find solutions to the dangers experienced by journalists in the country, expose the difficult conditions of their work, raise advocacies towards unresolved killings amongst their ranks, and draw attention and solution to the traumas that they face regularly. I argue that these transmedia solidarities may have potentials for addressing some of the urgent needs of journalists too, beyond the urgent needs of those they cover. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, for showing us how journalism can be just the start of more storytelling and different kinds of storytelling and in exciting ways too. I'm going to hand over to Devi now. And I just want you to know that just before Devi came to Singapore, she won a prize. The Alliance of Independent Journalists in Indonesia, which we know as AJI, awarded her its prize, the S.K. Trimurti Award, which is given to an activist journalist who plays an important role in advancing press freedom, freedom of expression, gender equality, and the public's right to information. I asked Devi to tell us why she went from the safe Straits Times to starting a newsroom where every single member of the staff is at risk every time they put out one of their stories. And I'm ready to hear that. Thanks, Devi.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for that very generous introduction. I will tell you about why I moved from the safety of Straits Times to what I'm doing now. Not directly, there was some gap in between, but we'll get there in slides, one of the slides. But anyway, everybody, I would first like for you to imagine that you are a young woman, and I think there's some grammatical errors and typos. I was working on this one. I was still jet lagged, so forgive that. Anyway, ignore that. But so I would like for you to imagine that you are a young woman who is smart, independent, critical, who have opinions about issues, and like to read, like to learn. But when you're looking for a media that are targeted, for media or publications that are targeted for your demography, they don't treat you like the smart woman that you are, like the independent, the critical woman that you are. Instead, you are treated as a one-dimensional thing. You are a body that needs to be fixed. You are obsessed with fashion, and you are a woman who must please her man. Like, this would be one of the typical cover of those women-focused publications. So the thing is, it's not just women-focused publications that are not treating the women right or not representing women right. The non-women publications like Rolling Stone, which is one of my favorite magazines, also not doing very well in that department. Even when women have a lot of things going, women who are very talented, they are still treated as a sexual being, hypersexual being, as opposed to their male peers. So in Indonesian media, sometimes it's even worse. Even when a woman is dead, they are still sexualized. These are a couple of example of two headlines, a typical headline from an online news site. And one of them, the first one says, "The body of a pretty woman was found in a ditch." Pretty is a word that is often used for women in media coverage, whether to describe a model, a CEO, a governor, an athlete, even a dead woman. And then the second headline says, a woman's body was found without underwear, which is pretty weird because that has nothing to do with the rest of the story. So that just shows that representation of women in the Indonesian media, most of them, are still very poor. The news framing is still very bad. Often it perpetuates problematic issues like rape culture, is sexualized women, and the language is still sexist, and there's still a lot of stereotyping, gender stereotyping. So it was on this landscape that 5 years ago, a couple of friends of mine who are journalists and I decided to start Magdalene. So we co-founded it in September 2013, and we started it as actually at the time it was only an English language publication that was focused on women. And we thought that we wanted to have something, an alternative media that would provide or that serve women who were underserved by the current media offering. And at the time, I was a freelance journalist, a freelance writer and editor. I had quit from the Straits Times a couple of years before. I'd been working for the Straits Times, and before that, for the Jakarta Post for about 14 years before that. And I was feeling pretty exhausted. I think a lot of people at that age would find this when they come to a point where they feel their job was no longer had any meaning to them. And I was thinking that no matter what I did, it didn't make any impact. But so what I did was, just like a lot of Gen Xers, I quit and became a yoga teacher for a while. And I was also doing writing, of course. But at some point, I missed journalism again. So that's when we decided to create Magdalene. So the name Magdalene came from, as you would guess probably, Mary Magdalene, who is a biblical female figure who for centuries has suffered from being misjudged and misunderstood because of patriarchy. In a way, we think that this is an experience of every woman who has ever tried to assert themselves in a very patriarchal world or society. So we are here to reclaim the narrative on women, to represent the experience of women in the most inclusive and authentic ways. These are some of the headlines of our stories. Magdalene, for us, serves two functions. One of them is as a publication that produces journalistic outputs like news reports, in-depth articles, investigative stories, and to raise awareness on issues that are important but are not being covered by the mainstream media. They are neglected by most mainstream media. The other function is as a platform for people to share their stories and perspective through personal essays, through op-ed and columns. So these are voices that would normally never find a place in a typical mainstream publication. So as you can see from some of the headlines, they can be quite controversial or taboo in Indonesia, in the Indonesian context. And amidst an alarmingly increasing increase of Islamic conservatism in Indonesia, we actually never shy away from we never shy away from shining lights on issues that matter, that are seen as sensitive or taboo in Indonesia, especially when the stake is high for some people. And these people could be members of minority groups, and they could be racial, religious, or sexual minorities. Our coverage of LGBT is quite critical, and I think we are probably one of the, at least in the beginning, we were one of the first publications that were very critical with highlighting persecution against LGBT. So when we first started, we had aimed for slightly older readers, sort of like my age, but maybe younger. We had aimed for some, late 20, 30-something readers. But as we progressed, we found out that our readers are quite young. Actually, our readers, about more than half of our readers are 18 to 24 years old, and followed by 25 to 34. And 80% of them are women, but 20% of them are men. So this is good for us, because in order to beat patriarchy, we need to work with men. And most of our readers say in our reader survey that they like our content because of the topic, the hard-hitting topic that we cover. And those include sexuality, social issues, and religion. I think it makes sense that we can capture the young audience because they're at the age when they are most critical about their environment, their situation. They start to have big questions about life, about social norms, and the way traditions and religions impact their lives and positions in society. And they're also the people most affected by gender-based discrimination and increasing conservatism in Indonesia, all the excess of patriarchal society. That is why we also collaborate a lot with communities and groups on gender-based initiatives. And one of the most important ones is a campaign to raise awareness on sexual violence and the pervasiveness of sexual violence in Indonesia. In Indonesia, every 3 hours or every 2 hours, 3 women experience sexual violence. So in 2016, we conducted, along with a support group for sexual violence survivor, Lentera Sintas, and Change.org, we conducted an online survey that was participated by 25,000 respondents, and the result was that more than a third of the respondents have experienced sexual assault. And of the 93% who actually experienced this, who survived this, they never reported it, or they never even tell anyone about it. So this survey, the result, helped mobilize women's group to actually push for the anti-sexual violence bill in Parliament. The bill has been around for some time, but Parliament has been delaying it for many years because they think it wasn't a priority. Now, sexual violence is a personal issue for me because I am actually a survivor of child sexual violence. So, and I have written about the issue several times, and one of them was in a long essay that I wrote a few years back. And the impact was very, in a way, even though it's sad, but it's also empowering because it was followed by a lot of people coming up to me or started writing for Magdalene about their own experience. And a lot of the time, it was the first time they ever opened up. So this, to me, is the most powerful impact of narrative journalism. So we have a few more impactful stories, and one of them was this, this is kind of interesting, this a dating app. It's called Ayo Polygamy. It's a dating app for married men to find second, third, or fourth wife. And it was not well known at the time. So we send one of our reporters to go undercover to become a member of this app. And a month later, she wrote a story, and it became viral soon, and it was picked up and followed up by a lot of media, including international media like the BBC. So, so this proves that while one half of Indonesians are getting harder in the way they practice religion, are getting more conservative, the other half is also pushing back. You know, the other half wants an Indonesia that is progressive, and so they are fighting back against this wave of, changes that would put them back, or trying to put them back in the domestic realm, especially the women. So I guess this slide is where I start talking about our struggle, which means money problem, and we have that. But Magdalene is a very tiny company. When we started it, we only spent $1,500, so that's not much. And Hera and I worked on it for almost a year, just the two of us, curating stories, editing stories, writing, and all this other stuff, before we started taking in interns. And many of these interns, they started as interns, but they never left because they love us so much, and they're hardcore feminists. So they're like, yeah, we're gonna stay, even though they barely get paid. So now our team is very small, probably less than 15 people, depending on how many interns are working. And Hera and I are still not getting paid because this is still self-funding. And that's the problem, because I don't come from a business background. So I'm struggling with that part of my job. But we are currently in the process of getting investment. And what helps also is that we are a small company. We don't have an office, so we can control our expenses. And our monetizing, or our business plan, is very flexible. So it's not just advertisement, which obviously is hard to rely on when you're that small. So we also we have other ways of monetizing, like events, book publishing. We have an e-shop, and we have a consultancy service, which is right now the biggest part of our revenue. Another challenge that we find is that the increasing use of the criminal defamation law and information and electronic transaction law on freedom of expression that are being used to suppress differing views. Now, freedom of the press is legally protected in Indonesia, and the government is pretty much hands-off when it comes to freedom of the press. However, there has been a continuous attack or violence against on the press done by groups or community or mobs of people. And usually these are related to content related to religion. So because a lot of our content deal with that, we question some of the religious teaching that are perpetuating harmful practices or gender discrimination. That kind of puts us expose us to the threat. But knock on wood, nothing has happened to us so far. We have, of course, negative comments. We have trolls. I get trolls all the time on Twitter, which is why I don't really exist on Twitter. But we're fine with that as long as we can still exist. At the end of the day, we are still struggling in all aspects of the work. But when we think of how much we can contribute to the conversation, and in the digital space as well as offline, and also the lack of alternative media that talks about the issues that we talk about. And when we think of the challenges to mainstream gender equalities and progressive values, we know that there's no other way but to keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Devi. So now I'm going to just sit back. I'm going to sit back and watch with awe and admiration as this man tells us the story of Malaysia Kini. Okay, because it's the story is just too bizarre. Okay, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, you might have looked at Malaysia Kini and say, oh, maybe they won't last another year or something. Last year, you might have looked at Malaysia Kini and said maybe they won't last till the end of 2018 because, good grief, they had to put out a call for donations from their readers for a legal defense fund because they had so many lawsuits against them and lawyers to pay. So would these people survive or not? So Prem has been involved from day one with his good friend, grew a newsroom from half a dozen people to 90 people a few months ago, and now they're hiring again. What an amazing story. Start. Okay.
Is it okay if I just speak from here?
Sure.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much, Alan, for the nice introduction. I think the word bizarre kind of resonates with Malaysia right these days. We're a country of many interesting developments, never a dull moment in Malaysia. We lost a couple of planes. Now we have a 93-year-old prime minister. Today, actually yesterday was the 20th anniversary of Anwar Ibrahim's arrest in September 1998. 20 years ago, Mahathir put Anwar behind bars. This year, Mahathir got Anwar out of bars. 20 years ago, it wasn't clear whether Anwar would succeed Mahathir. Today, again, it's not clear whether Anwar will take over from Mahathir again. So it's been a long process in Malaysia, but we're very glad that Malaysia Kini has been part of it. May 9th this year was our election. Malaysia Kini was in the thick of things. We had a team deployed all over the country, and we weren't really sure which way it would go. So elections closed about 5 o'clock, and the counting started that night. And we thought that, okay, we've been disappointed before. There was no change, so we thought we kind of expected the same. But by 8:30, you could see the results were getting delayed, not really being announced, which was a kind of a signal. And about 9 o'clock, you could see that states in Sabah, Sarawak, the opposition was doing well. They were doing well in Peninsular Malaysia. Some key seats were going to the Pakatan Harapan. And about 9:45, with nearly 1.5 million readers accessing Malaysia Kini every minute, they blocked our website. The Multimedia Commission issued an order to block Malaysia Kini. So we had things ready to go because we expected something like that to happen. So we instituted, we issued new URLs, places to access information. So the traffic went down a bit and it started to come up. But we knew that if they issued an order to block Malaysia Kini, then something was really on the cards. Mahathir went on television around 11:30, 12, claiming victory and asking the Election Commission to release the results. And the results started to trickle in. The entire mainstream media were kind of silent. They were just repeating results which are already known, very, not really showing the total count. But what's happening, and Malaysia Kini became the only media reporting the count. So, it kind of trickled up. And at about 2:15 at night, the magic number was 112. So we had about 108, 4 seats to go. And I was working with the team doing the count. So I said, okay, look, go find me four seats. So we tracked down 4 seats, which was unannounced. We did the numbers, we called up our sources, we went to the ground, and we managed to find seats that were won by Pakatan. So at 2:28 in the morning, Malaysia Kini was the first media to announce that the Pakatan Harapan government had won. So it was quite a moment. It was quite a historical moment when we pressed the button. So I was updating the sheet, so I kind of pressed the button, and then I went to the newsroom and said, 30 seconds, guys, it's going to be live. So everybody was staring at the streets, at the screens, and ding, ding, 112, and, family and friends were all over the country, and everyone was saying how the mood changed that very moment. It was quite a moment. So at 2:28, we declared a change in government, and minutes later, all the mainstream media followed suit. So it was that kind of influence that Malaysia Kini had, in difficult times. I think it's an interesting story. It started 20 years ago, and Stephen, my partner, and I, it was actually a few days after Anwar was arrested, about a week or so after Anwar was arrested. And some people approached me to start an underground newspaper, saying, hey, this whole reform thing is going on, we need to get the word out. And at the time, I had come back from studying in Australia, and I said, look, an underground newspaper will not work. It'll be very easily closed down. It's too difficult to get going. It's very easy to curtail. Why don't we do an online newspaper? It was very early days of the internet, still kind of dial-up modems, and nobody really heard about it. And Stephen was in Bangkok at the time. But so it took us about a year to get going. We raised funding, and we started off with 6 people. And we launched in November 20th, 1999. So November next year will be our 20th anniversary. So we just launched with 6 people, and in a small office. But the mood in the country was such that there was such an appetite for independent information. In Indonesia, across the straits, we had Reformasi also going, the fall of Suharto. So everybody thought that Malaysia would be next, but it took us 20 years to catch up to Indonesia. Took us a long time. But there was such a mood that we grew to about 100,000 readers overnight. And our idea was very simple. If we could publish the news quickly and fast, and be the first in news and be the most independent, then people will be forced to read Malaysia Kini. And the thesis was that if Malaysians had access to independent information, they will be able to make better electoral choices, and over time, we would see a more democratic Malaysia. So we went at it, but it was a tough time. We got raided by the police, under Dr. Mahathir, although he had already pledged not to censor the internet with the multimedia super corridor. So we worked hard, and there's a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of challenges. But very quickly, we were able to become the voice of the spirit of reformasi, or spirit of change, spirit of contesting against corruption. And we kind of did that with a small group of people. We had an investor, the Media Development Investment Fund, in 2002, and they helped us grow. Mahathir stepped down in 2003, and then after he was stepped down, he was in a way sidelined by his successor. He was sidelined and kept out in the media. And very interestingly, we had an interview with Dr. Mahathir, with the first mainstream media to interview Prime Minister Mahathir after he stepped down in 2003. So people were shocked. This was the guy who tried to shut down Malaysia Kini, but Malaysia Kini was actually giving him a lot of space. In fact, the same thing happened after May 9th. The first interview Najib Razak gave to a local media was at Malaysia Kini, at our offices, about 3 weeks after he lost the elections. So, we've been able to build that rapport with, both sides of the government over the years. In 2002, in order to sustain our business, we went subscription. It was very, very challenging in very, very early days to go subscription. But it was a kind of a crisis. We either had to close down or survive. And we asked ourselves a kind of a fundamental question. If Malaysia Kini closes, who will miss us? Who will be sad that we are gone? Who will want us to survive? And we thought that in the end of the day, it will be our readers. It won't be advertisers. It may not be donors. Donors will say, well, there'll be other projects. It is our core loyal readership who would in the end support Malaysia Kini. We did a reader survey, but less than 1% of our readers said they'll pay for content. So, it's sometimes you got to ignore the data and just go ahead with what you believe, right? Go ahead for what your passion is. And we launched a subscription in 2002, and we were very disappointed. Out of nearly 100,000 readers, only 1,000 subscribed. So we thought we would at least get 5,000 to 10,000. So it's quite a struggle. But those days you couldn't even use your credit card online. You had to send a check or pay cash. So it's actually very tough to get things going. But we built up over the years. We built up a very good subscription revenue over the years. It grew very fast, grew very steadily. And in 2008, at the next election for Badawi, the ruling BN lost half Malaysia, the whole of the West Coast. And incidentally, they lost in every urban center across the country. The BN lost. And when asked, why did they lose so much, even Badawi admitted that it was internet, and Malaysia Kini was the only media online. So it showed the influence of the internet. So it showed Malaysia Kini's influence, and we grew a lot since 2008. Today we are about 100, over 100 staff. We publish in English, Malay, Chinese, Tamil. We have a video team. We have about, I think last month we had 8 million unique visitors. On election night, our total number of devices was 17 million devices connected to us. So, more than half the country was connected to Malaysia Kini. We make about 70% of our money on advertising and about 30% from subscription. So it's been quite a remarkable run. I've had a very good team to work hard and very passionate in what they do. A lot of the old timing staff are still there doing what they do. I think the real challenge now is going forward. What's the next game plan for Malaysia Kini? After May 9, the media has switched overnight. What media was owned by UMNO and the BN, now even those media are now very independent. So even the Star, Belay Mail, New Straits Times, just about every media has now become, in a way what Malaysia Kini used to be, or in a way what we hope the media to be, which is to be independent. Our goal was to establish independent media in Malaysia. So you can't complain when everybody becomes independent and starts to report like you, right? You can't complain when in a way your mission is accomplished. But that forces us to redefine ourselves and to rethink what we are. So it's of course challenging. We will definitely stick to becoming independent media, but that itself won't be enough. How do you actually develop, going further? So we're launching an academy. We're growing our television. We're going to. I'm very keen to go into movies, films, because I think films carry a lot of emotional power to move the debate on issues. So there's a whole area that we can grow that we are focusing on. So in a way, it's become kind of a red ocean, and we have to redefine ourselves and grow to continue to be the kind of bastion of independent media. We're thinking of setting up like a Malaysia Kini Foundation, and in a way, the foundation will also act as an anchor for Malaysia Kini going forward. In terms of lessons learned, I think the key thing for a media organization is to build, first of all, relevancy to your audience. Why are you relevant? Why do you exist? Why do the reader needs you? I think the earlier discussion about audience is very important. So first of all is relevancy, and the second of all is trust. No matter what we do, we will always remain independent, we'll always remain ethical, we'll always do good journalism. So to make sure that we stick to our core principles and trust builds that bridge to the audience. And the third thing is to be a voice. Voice for your audience. We always stick very closely to our audience, and in a way we express the sentiments of our readers, sentiments of the angst of the public. And that in a way gels the audience with you. It's not you, journalists and editors, and the audience, you one and the same. So like Malaysia Kini, we think ourselves more like a social movement rather than a company reporting the news. So it's those things that actually shape the success of media today. And like Alan mentioned, we lost a case at the Court of Appeal, and the judge made us pay a penalty of 350,000 ringgit. But to our surprise, we asked for an appeal, and we managed to raise that fund in 11 days. It took us just 11 days to raise $350,000 from our readers, which was amazing. We were surprised by the sheer ability to gather support. So we're very thankful for that. I think those are the core lessons. I think that if you are relevant, and the readers trust you, and you're a voice from the readers, then I think the readers will support you in any way they can, and I think you'll be a successful media. Thank you.
Thank you. You have another 1 minute and 24 seconds. Tell us how you pay your journalists. You told us an interesting story. Editors get less.
Yeah, we at Malaysia Kini, our entry level salaries are quite competitive. We pay, probably a bit higher than market rates, but at the top level, we don't pay as much. So myself, Stephen, the top managers actually get, pretty much the same, and it's not. It's very tight between the bottom and the top. So when we tell our Malaysia Kini staff, we tell them, look, come here and do it for passion, but when you leave, please ask for double or triple your salary, because that's what you're worth. And most times they do get at least double what they're earning at Malaysia Kini when they go. And there have been many cases of them leaving and coming back. So we always welcome them back to Malaysia Kini.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I just love this panel, okay? Because I've been hearing stories of courageousness, creativity, bravery, the power of journalism being practiced. Sometimes we are all so caught up in the numbers and profitability and the disappearance of readers and advertisers and so on. There is so much still happening. Everyone's saying, where are those millennials? They're over here. Here's Davy talking about readers who are from 18 years old to their 20s. That's who everybody seems to be looking for, and you found them. There's Prem talking about the importance of being relevant and getting your readers to trust you and being brave enough to start. Many of the things Malaysia Kini did over the years, like Magdalene, is just being bold enough, breaking out of what everybody else is doing and doing something different, going with your gut feel on something you think is right and you feel needs to be done, and getting the people around you who believe it too. Cheryl, I have to ask you, you work with these artists and filmmakers and so on. Listening to these two guys, what would the artist and filmmaker do? What's the movie they're going to make? Tell us.
No, certainly. I was mentioning to Pramesh that as a student, I was just reading about Malaysia Kini and how it started when I was doing a PhD, and I think it's a fantastic story that can be told, an inspiring story that can be told about the value of media, but also the possibility of sustainability of media that's alternative, that's not particularly profit-driven, and what changes it can do to society on such a scale. So that is valuable as content for easily a documentary. Yeah.
Documentary. Movie.
Same for Magdalene, of
Yes,
course. Yeah.
sure. Okay, no questions. Raul has a question from the Philippines. Wonderful, Raul. Thank you for standing up and doing that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Raul Dancel. I write for the Straits Times, but I'm based in Manila, the Philippines. One particular trend I've observed in the Philippines is that, I think the most vicious way right now that journalists are censored is through organized online hate. Right now in the Philippines, you have bloggers are often more influential than journalists in the Philippines, and these bloggers usually take sides, right? And they easily mobilized millions to drown out usually investigative journalists, for instance, when they work on a story or post something online, they are often inundated with so much hate, so much vicious comments, that you have situations at times like, I understand that at Reuters, they have had to hide two of the reporters working on stories about the drug killings in the Philippines in safe houses for a time. So my question is, and this works both ways, no? I see the state sponsoring often hate online, but there are also quarters outside the government, outside the state, politicians with agenda, also using this method to advance their agenda, I guess. My question is, as journalists, is there redress for us over this trend, or should we just dig deeper down the bunker and is there legal redress, for instance? Because in the Philippines, I also see that some are trying to use online libel laws to roll back against online hate, but this really isn't going, isn't really going very far. So for right now, I see like if you're a journalist, and what happens usually is that journalists who used to be very outspoken online, I see them often tempering their comments online, or maybe outrightly withdrawing their online presence. So is there so my question is there a recourse for us?
All right, great, thanks. Davy, you want to go first? You must have borne the brunt of.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, expand on your statement and your question as well. A lot of the time, the writers, the bloggers, and the journalists who are being abused the most online are women, female journalists, especially when they write, even when they write issues as innocent or as apolitical as sports, they get abused a lot. So it's not just political stories, political issues, but I just think that for every generation, every period has its challenge, and online hate is also big right now in Indonesia. And it's not just online. So online is just the gateway. So what would happen is that there are, like literally army of people, groups of people who are out there looking for content, whether posted by the media or by individuals that they think are insulting religion or insulting their political values or whatever, their social values, and they would screen cap them and then they would spread them in their circle or their group or whatever, and then often this would lead to an actual attack, an actual physical attack or assault. They would go and go to this, and then eventually they can also report this person, whoever created the content, to the police, and the police oftentimes would go along. Like I said, I talked about the information and technology law and the defamation law, but again, for me as a journalist and on, I guess, the media, a person who work for the media, that should not stop us from doing what we do, because whatever the period is, like 20, 30 years ago, my senior, veteran journalists who were doing their job in the Suharto time, they are also facing similar situation. In fact, one of them is here, Nezar, I think he's outside. He was kidnapped by the military at the time, although he was an activist, not a journalist then. But, what I'm saying is that we can, of course, you have to think of what do you want in life, and whether that is part of the deal, that you are willing to sacrifice. But to me, online hatred is probably less dangerous than being kidnapped by special forces in the Suharto time. Although, again, that might lead to physical attacks. But, as long as we don't defame people, we don't lie in our reporting, as long as we do things ethically, according to our code of ethics, I think, we should just go, we should just continue.
Thanks, Davy. Rem, what recourse for journalists who come under attack?
Yeah, I think online hate is very tough to deal with. I think George wrote a book on hate speech, right? Mm-hmm. And how often it gets weaponized and used. I think definitely you can challenge the people who are trying to instigate this hate speech, but more importantly is to develop some sort of social movement analysis and ideology about how do you then, in a way, create, limit their access. You cannot eradicate totally this kind of mob rule online, but how do you inoculate the wider population against, smaller groups which are trying to create a mob rule and not allow them to expand. Trying to jail them and trying to put them all behind bars is not going to work. But partly it's winning the battle also with the police and other state enforcement agencies to neutralize the use of state actors against journalists. And then partly is to have kind of an ideological competition to limit this idea of using hate against journalists. So how do we convince or at least split or create counter ideological positions to reduce or erode, limit the access of this mob rule online? I don't have an answer, but I think that's where we have to look at to create an answer.
Another question, somebody? Frank. And then Emily. So Frank first. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much first for your sharings. I'm Frank Liu, DCS Fellow, AJ Fellow. I'm from China. I have two questions for the panelists. First is about your relationship with government, and the second is about your relationship with the younger generation of readers. From my perspective, I found that probably your media in your countries are not so conventional, traditional mainstream media, but I would love to know how would you deal with your relationship with the government? Would you receive some oppression from the government? Or how do you gain the trust from your readers by the same time? And the second question is, I would love to know, can you share from your work, how would you see the younger generation of readers in your countries? They have what kind of some different interests they have towards the news you covered, you report, the issues you are covered. Thank you very much.
In terms of working with our governments, with the previous government, we've always tried to have a professional relationship with the previous government. That was obviously difficult because of all the harassment. But nevertheless, we did our best to, in a way, give both sides of the stories. Part of Malaysia, some states like Penang and Selangor were governed by the opposition party. So, we held the state government to account, although they were held by one party, as well as the federal government held by the other party. So our readers could judge us on that basis. So we basically want to have a professional relationship with the government, and through our professional reporting, we hope to gain their trust over time. The second question was on
younger readers.
Younger readers. I think that's the biggest dilemma we face, is how to reach out to younger readers. We don't have an answer. We're not doing so well with the under 25 audience, so we need to come up with more creative ways to reach out to them. I don't have the answer, but I think that's something that we need to work on. A lot of younger readers watch video, so we're investing a lot in terms of video news as opposed to text news, but that's just a start.
Thanks. Cheryl, you work with young people every single day.
Yes.
Why are they like that?
No, it's funny. I think just last week I asked my students, who among you, last week was the opening of our classes, who among you have held a newspaper in the past week? Nah, past month? Nah. So basically the students are really following their news. And are you going onto news websites? No, they really are getting their news on Facebook. And I think media in the Philippines are trying to cope with this in the sense that putting their content out there and making them more appealing to young people. The thing, though, that changes the dynamics is the possibility to really curate and select what they would read, right? So the very possibility of selecting what you read makes it really crucial. So if I can choose whether to subscribe to this or not, or to read this or not, then you really need to be much more competitive. But I'm speaking here about students in my university, a private university institution. I'm talking here, but there's another bunch of millennials. In my research, I work with young people in slum communities, really low-income communities. And where do they get their news? So in the research, there's free Facebook basics in the Philippines, so if youth get their news on Facebook, but their access of Facebook is via free Facebook Basics, where you get the headlines, but once you click on the headline, you actually have to start paying for the content, right? So you see the post, but once you want to click on an image, you also have to. It will tell you now you have to pay data charges. So the reality of that tells you, kids get the headline, but not the content, right? So it makes us think. I think this requires a lot more research, more systematic research on the relationship. But I think in a country like the Philippines, where a lot of your people are actually going onto news using free Facebook basics, you need to understand that demographic on how they consume news as well.
Great, thank you. Go back to Devi for dealing with the government on some of the stories that you do, or you?
Well, fortunately, the government is pretty much hands-off with the press. Yeah, it has been like that, I guess, in the past 2 decades or so since Reformasi. Of course, there are exceptions, like in the conflict areas. But so we don't really have a relationship, whether it's positive or negative. So we haven't really had any kind of harassment or anything like that. Now, things may change because next year there's going to be an election, and we don't know who's going to win yet. And whoever, if we have this current government, of course, it might be still the same. But if we have a change of government, things might change dramatically. So. Mm-hmm.
So, have you taken the help of cybercrime or something?
Yeah, well, I don't think there is such. This is why I was talking about there is not really a way for us to pursue things. I mean, you could, but it's just going to be too much of a hassle to pursue that. So a lot of the time we just have to kind of, accept it and just let it go.
Because yesterday I was just talking to Shri and all. Facebook must help us in this abusement and all, threats and all.
Yeah, but a lot of it, I mean,
especially for the women's channel, like. You and I'm also sailing in the same boat.
Yes.
I also have a women's channel. It's in Gujarat. And the threats and all abuses come and...
Yeah, there's a lot of rape threat as well for women.
That's right.
But but then again, I don't think the Indonesian police or there is an authority that can really deal with cybercrime when we report this kind of cases in a way that would really be beneficial to us. We're just going to probably deal with a lot of paperwork, so we may end up having to pay getting some grease money, so it's a lot of time we just have to accept
Let's
it.
hope Facebook should help us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Emily, wait, Emily first. Yeah. Wow.
Hi, I'm Emily from South China Morning Post, and thank you for your speeches. And I'm especially interested in what Ms. Devi just shared now, since what I have briefly shared this yesterday. Our newspaper is a 100-year-old print newspaper that's turning into digital and appealing to wider readerships. And our readers are mostly expect professional and male. And one of the challenges we are seeing is that we have an aging readership, and sometimes we find it difficult to target and engage younger readers. So I'm very impressed by what Ms. Devi is sharing here, since young women is a missing group that I've been trying to target, and I'm hoping you can share with us some of your tips. How do you find story for them, and how do you target them without stereotyping them? And also another difficulty is for us to engage the millennials. You have shared, some of our friends here shared how they use Facebook to find them, but as what I'm seeing in Hong Kong, I'm not sure whether this is the trend in other countries, but in Hong Kong, the millennials are moving away from Facebook, and they regard it as something used by their grannies and something opened by their parents and forced them to take pictures, that kind of thing. So they kind of hate it, and they move away from Facebook to some other social media platforms, such as Snapchat, TikToks, that kind of platform that is really hard for us to reach. So is there any tips for us to follow and learn from you? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can I just take that other question too?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Po Ling. I'm from PR industry. I have a question for Pramesh from Malaysia Kini. As we all know, it's alleged that the Singapore government has some degree of influence on the Singapore media scene here. So for Pramesh's case, if, hypothetically, if you are a Singaporean and you'd like to set up a Malaysia Kini of sorts in Singapore, do you think it will survive 20 years or even 20 months?
The easy one first. Yeah.
Whenever I come to Singapore, I get asked this question. I remember last night we were talking a bit about this with Alan and others, right? I think the idea would be to set up something which kind of works in Singapore, not to replicate Malaysia Kini directly here. I think you need to feel the pulse of what the Singaporeans really feel and come up with innovative ways to do it. It doesn't have to be a website, it doesn't have to be an app, but you have to resonate with what's the angst here in the country and work with that and build something up which is truly Singaporean and not a replication of something else out there. I think it's high time. I think that there's a book on inequality in Singapore, right? I saw that on the table, published by IPS. So there are a lot of issues here. So I think if you get it right, I think it'll last. It'll last 20 years. So I think it's up to Singaporeans to do it, and I believe Singaporeans can.
Right. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Devi.
Yeah.
Tell us about your younger readers, how you're engaging them too. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so that problem with news media, I guess the general mainstream news media only being read by male and older male is not just in your country, but also in Indonesia. In fact, I think I just read a survey that shows that most of the mainstream media that we have, like Kompas, Tempo, Jakarta Post, and all this other largest media in Indonesia, they are read mostly by men, like women only make up 15% or something, which is a shock for me. So I think, if you've seen my presentation earlier, you cannot blame the women, right? Because a lot of the framing is still very masculine. And so I think this is a very fundamental problem. Like perhaps just looking back at the way some of the issues are being covered, are being played in your media, in your publication. Maybe there's too much, maybe the framing is just not friendly to women. Maybe the language or maybe the issues are just not impacting women. So, so I guess content is one. If you want to aim for women and younger women, and even men, if younger men, but in this case, I guess I'm talking about the women, maybe start covering issues that are really, that really make impact on them. For us, a lot of it's about sexuality, but not in the way that women's media are doing it. It's not about sex, but it's about the way about body image issues and things like that, and even things like pop culture, the coverage of movies and things like that. You can see the winds are blowing the other way now, as you can see from some of the movies like Wonder Woman, and all these other movies. There is a kind of feminist awakening, and a lot of this mainstream media have to kind of take that into consideration in order to get the younger readers. As for social media, as for how to engage the millennials, I agree, Facebook is getting old. And I think that's one of the channels that is like the least engaging for us, although we are still engaging them, but it's the least of all them. Twitter works for us, but also Instagram. But on Instagram, we do a lot of infograph. So, and infographics really make a lot of difference because Instagram is a very is a very visual platform. So, and you do want to still give a value-added content or posts on your Instagram. So we do a lot of infograph. Like one of them that become very viral recently is this infograph on signs that you are in an abusive relationship or toxic relationship. There's like just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, attractive pictures and all this stuff. Other than that, you can also start to, explore other channels, other platforms. In Indonesia, Line is pretty big. In fact, some major publications like Femina in Indonesia, which is the largest women's magazine, they are actually very small. They almost don't have a presence on the internet, but they are big online. So I don't know what it is in your country, in your region. There might be something else. Line is kind of like Snapchat. I don't know. I've actually not. Yeah. So, but apparently it's big among the younger readers. So yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Yes, Sana.
Hi, I'm Sana from Pakistan. Thank you so much for your sharing your experiences. Since we are all struggling to, learn how to engage with the younger audience, I would like to ask Jarell, since she mentioned about the transmedia and using different kinds of media. So, can you share how did it help to? Did it help to engage the young audiences? Did it help with the movies and you said it's, with the artwork and everything. Thank you.
Can I take Elijah as well?
Hi, I am Lighter from Malaysia. So I have two questions. One is we has a lot of media law, like the communication and the media law, and also the sedition law to control the media coverage and freedom. May I know what is a strategy you take to overcome this kind of the challenge? And the second question for the Malaysia Guinea, after the midnight changed the new government, then the Malaysia Guinea looked like from the independent media to the mainstream media. So can you tell me how do you maintain your independence and you just monitor the new government? Thank you.
I think that definitely we continue to report both sides of the story, both the government's voice and also the voice of the opposition. In fact, I think we've given a lot of coverage to Najib Razak, UMNO, and other opposition forces, as well as giving voice to a lot of civil society and their views. For example, recently Anwar Ibrahim announced running in a by-election in Port Dickson, and there were a lot of complaints about that in Malaysia Kini. So if you read Malaysia Kini, from a lot of it, you will see that in fact we are being pretty balanced. It is difficult to differentiate. It's something that differentiation and trust comes over time. It's hard to see it on a day-to-day basis. But I think over time, the trust that people have, we will make sure that we will maintain it, and we will show that we can hold the current government accountable.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah. So one of the examples that I've shown is an initiative from the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, the Sikian Project, which is a children's book project. But apart from this, the PCIJ, or Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, is working on a lot of their many investigative pieces. So these are something to the tune of 10 pages that a young person would not normally read, but they would now collaborate with an artist. So the book author is just one, but they also have several other projects. One other one is a podcast. So a couple of others are films, for example, with documentary filmmakers. So they try to take a well-researched story that's done by their journalists and then package that into different other forms that can be perhaps more palatable or easily digestible by different kinds of audiences, especially millennials. I guess one thing which reminded me from a question earlier in the morning, what's not really tapped is the power of radio. Especially in our rural communities, radio is still quite relevant, especially in the form of drama too, right? So I'm seeing its resurgence in the context of drama. And so if dramatization of content from investigative journalistic pieces can be rendered in podcasts, or it can be rendered in a children's book. It could also be rendered in the form of a radio drama and then contemporize it just to insinuate or instigate more conversations about particular issues.
Thank you very much. No more questions? Oh, one last question from...
It's for Magdalene. I was just wondering about the line between activism and journalism. Do you often get asked that? Because like even we're told to be aware that a journalist is not supposed to be an activist, you know, like things like that. And do a lot of audiences ask you, oh, it's just, you know, like those feminists, you know, things like that. Another story, you know, do you then get questions on your credibility of what you do? And also, like, you have, like, progressed, built a huge audience, but why have you had problems monetizing all that traffic that comes? Because it's 5 years, right, since you started? Like, you have a huge following, but why no money?
Thank you, Zara. That's a good question to wrap up this session, and I'll let all my panelists here take this. Start with Devi. Can activists be journalists? Can journalists be activists? Where's the line? And 5 years already, why no money?
Yeah. I'll answer the second one first. 5 years, Hera and I are still have our day job. We do consultancy work, so we have not been able to really focus on this because we have not been able to have to get investment. Although we are in the process of getting investment, so 5 years we cannot monetize from advertising because compared to, in order for you to make money from advertising, you have to have a lot of eyeballs. Like, you know, we're talking about millions of eyeballs every day. We're not there yet, so we cannot rely on advertising. But we have been monetizing. We have been monetizing from other things, from book publication, from shop, from events, and from the consultancy part of our company. So yes, monetizing, but not in a traditional media way. On activism and journalism, now we see ourselves as journalism with a cause. So we come not from the typical neutral position of the mainstream news media would be. We come from a position where we are feminists, and we look at things from the feminist perspective. Of course, this doesn't mean that all of our content is very angry and all this stuff. We write about movies, we write about things, but there is that lens that we through which we perceive things, or we cover our issues. And the other thing also, we are, on top of that, we are journalists. So we still, we cover both sides. We are impartial when we write. But of course, at the end of the day, we are on the side of gender equality. So that is the biggest difference for us. When people ask me whether I'm a journalist or activist, I'll just say I'm a journalist, but I have, you would say a cause, yeah.
Thanks. Jump in on this one.
In the Philippines, this is a really contentious issue. But I think many of the journalists in the Philippines just want to really come to the bottom of facts, right? But sometimes in the process of presentation of facts, these also become the basis for mobilization, and so they are also implicated in the entire activism process, as whatever they report automatically becomes the jump-off point for many of the activists to act on. So I think it's really a blurry line that specific journalists have different positions on this.
Right. So Prem, you were an activist before you started Malaysia Kini, so tell us.
Yeah, I think as an activist, you form alliances, you work with people who are like-minded towards a goal that you want to achieve. You try to have influence, you try to, persuade people of a certain position, and you get laws changed, or, meet your goal. As a journalist, your higher goal is the truth. You're a storyteller. Your idea is that, I'm going to tell the stories that matter, and people are then going to, feel for those stories, right? So you form different types of alliances or things. Your one guiding objective is the truth, and the activism is there because you have to tell the truth to power. You have to show the truth and shine the mirror up to those who are most powerful. So you have to have a heart of an activist, but the intellectual center of a journalist.
Great, thank you. So can I ask everyone to join me in thanking this wonderful panel? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, Devi, Cheryl, and Prem. The title of this panel was, I admit, quite lofty, but the issues and the realities that the panel has highlighted are anything but. So certainly they've given us a lot of food for thought, and now we're just going to give you food for your stomach one last time. So tea is outside. Please reconvene at 3:30. Thank you.